Dollars now run a man will live on a banana boat and him a gone over broad. Because him say everywhere better than he have. But when him touch certain countries, see this system a fraud. Him have to run back a jam down and give it its reward. What a nice place we live. Sweet jam down, the only problem is dollars now run. Say what a sweet place we live. Sweet jam down, the only problem is dollars now.
Hey, what's up, one?
Hi, I am Kendi Pang.
Watagwan.
Watagwan.
Datagwan pa.
Watagwan. Watagwan.
Watagwan. Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays at 8 a.m., 1:30 p.m., and 10 p.m. on CVM TV.
Datagwan pa. Watagwan.
Good evening. Tonight on Global Lead, a medical diplomacy crisis is unfolding across the Caribbean. Cuba is withdrawing hundreds of doctors from the region, including 277 medical professionals from Jamaica. For decades, Cuban medical brigades have filled critical gaps in small state health systems. But now a collision between international labor standards, United States diplomatic pressure, and Caribbean health needs is now rewriting that arrangement in real time. We're focusing on Jamaica, but also on the rest of the region. Tonight we ask, what happens when global politics removes doctors from a small island health system? Then, a different global flashpoint. President Donald Trump has declared the war with Iran over. But Tehran says the United States does not get to decide when this war ends. So, is the conflict actually over? Or are we entering a new and more dangerous phase? And later, we speak with a Jamaican teacher living in the Gulf as regional tensions rise. What does daily life look like when you're living inside a war zone? I'm Jodianne Quarry, and this is Lead Stories Global Lead. The Cuban medical missions crisis. Well, for decades, Cuba's medical missions have been one of the most visible forms of international health diplomacy. Cuban doctors have served in hundreds of communities across the developing world, including here in the Caribbean. But tonight, that model is under unprecedented strain. Jamaica is now losing 277 Cuban healthcare workers. These include doctors, nurses, and medical technicians who have been working in our hospitals and clinics. The withdrawal comes after disagreements over how those medical professionals are paid and regulated. And Jamaica is not alone. Across the region, the system is beginning to unravel. Honduras has terminated its program. Guyana is now seeing the withdrawal of its brigade after a dispute over direct salary payments. The Bahamas? They're reviewing their arrangements, and several Caribbean states are now restructuring how these doctors are employed. The traditional model was state-to-state arrangements, with the host government paying contract fees to the Cuban government, which then deployed doctors abroad. International reports have raised concerns that the Cuban state retained a significant portion of those salaries. This issue, though, has also attracted strong scrutiny from the United States. The 2025 Trafficking in Persons report raised questions about whether elements of the program could amount to forced labor-like conditions. For small states, this has created a difficult choice. How do you balance international labor standards with the very real need for doctors in your public health system? To help us understand the practical consequences for Jamaica's health system, we're now joined by the president of the Medical Association of Jamaica, Professor Marvin Reed. Professor Reed, thank you for joining us inside Lead Story.
Good evening. My pleasure.
Professor Reed, how significant is the loss of 277 medical professionals for Jamaican healthcare system at a time like this?
All right. So the health system is has always basically been at what we call near capacity in terms of the demand that's placed on it and the workforce that is capable to meet that demand. And what has happened is that in order to meet the full demand, the government has engaged international partners to provide human labor to help meet some of the demand. So the Cubans really represent perhaps the largest external entity or external source of labor for us. And the challenge we have is that they're scattered throughout the health system, from what we call primary care. Some of them work in what we call the health centers in rural areas, to more specialized care, especially the eye care, which is perhaps the most famous component of it, as well as in cancer and in what we call intensive care settings. That is settings like when you're in ICU. So not only are there wide across the health system, but they occupy what we call specific niche areas in the health systems.
Those niche areas will be very important then to fill because, as you said, Cuban medical personnel in Jamaica were not generalists only. The program included specialists in ophthalmology, orthopedics, intensive care, areas where Jamaica already has documented shortfalls. Now, you've spoken about some areas that will be impacted, but which specific areas are most critically exposed, and how long realistically would it take for those specialists, either domestically or through bilateral recruitment, to come in and fill that gap?
All right, so basically, as you heard from the minister yesterday, and the key element here is the abruptness of the service withdrawal. So generally speaking, the options that you have at your disposal are to increase the number of hours that individuals within the system are working, redeploy your healthcare force to close some gaps, and to recruit. Now, the truth be told is that it would be reasonably possible to do some redeployment, especially as it relates to what we call the primary care services, that's the health center. Specialist areas are actually far more challenging because the normal time span that you would take to actually produce a specialist is actually quite long. And the other issue, of course, is that the salary that is offered in the public sector is often a bit challenging in terms of recruiting talent. So the specialist areas where we're most concerned about, and if you're looking at areas related to life and death kind of an areas, those would be your critical care or ICU, as well as your cancer care services. So those are the ones from our perspective that we are more concerned about in terms of the approach to filling the gap.
Let's take a look at what's been going on across the region, because this is not the only country that has been dealing now with the withdrawal of the Cuban healthcare missions. We have seen this in other countries like Honduras, where they have terminated their program on March 5. We've terminated March 4. We terminated our program on March 5. They're withdrawing from Guyana on March 10. We've seen across the region a number of countries as well negotiating, like the Bahamas, negotiating with the United States about keeping those individuals in their country. Grenada having their Minister of Health advocate for the Cuban doctors, and last year receiving sanctions as a result. We're seeing all of this happen now, right now. Guatemala is phasing out the program. We have seen and we know that this was coming. The Minister of Health said inside Lead Story last week, that the government had been preparing for potential fallout now and healthcare gaps. You are head of MAJ, you have members on the ground. Is the preparation visible to your association? And if not, what specifically should the government have done by now that it has not?
All right, so as you just mentioned, this process or signal from external parties that the Cuban program may be at risk has been going around for some time, because that's been in the public domain.
And the government said it had been negotiating since 2023 on this.
So that's what has been reported. The issue, there are what we call short-term strategies as well as medium to long-term strategies. So the medium to long-term strategy has been that the Ministry of Health has worked with our university, which is the University of the West Indies, to ask us to increase our training capacity to help mitigate or help resolve some of these issues. And the university has responded. But the truth is, if you take a specialist surgeon, that's going to take you 7, 8, 9 years to actually get into the system. So
Professor Reed, 7, 8, 9, 10 years?
Strategy has been to...
Hold on, Professor Reed, how many years? 7, 8, 9, 10?
Depends on, yes, it depends on what specialty you're
Oy. That's not short term, that's not even medium term, Professor Reed.
The shortest surgical specialty is 5. And then if you subspecialize, you're adding an additional year or 2. And if you do like neurosurgery, which is even longer, so it's actually a range. So let's say 5 to 10 years is when you're looking to get an experienced specialist into the system on a surgical specialty. On a medical specialty, which is the non-surgical side, you'd actually get that within a 4 to 6 year period. But the long and short is that what we're saying is a medium-term strategy to get the kind of specialist, and that's just on the doctor side. You also must remember that they also provided us with specialist nursing and specialist technicians. And so on an average, you're looking at a lead of about 5 years or more to actually get those persons into the system. So we accept that this is not going to happen or be solved tomorrow. So the only other way to fill the gap is to recruit. And we have heard reports and have seen activities where the minister has tried to recruit professionals from the Philippines, from the diaspora, and as well as from Ghana.
And we've seen those reports from him. But we've seen those reports from him, Professor Reed, but a Jamaican in St. Elizabeth going to the hospital tomorrow, especially since these Cuban doctors had been in more rural areas, had been, they hear the recruitment, they hear the process, but for tomorrow morning for them, next 2 weeks, even 2 months for them, this might be a longer lead time. Just before you go, Lead Story has learned that the Cuban medical personnel currently in Jamaica has received internal directives from the Cuban Ministry of Public Health, instructing them not to sign individual contracts with the Jamaican government. This is how the system is set up, that the host government, the Jamaican government, pays the government of Cuba, and then they get about 5 to sometimes 25% of their money. If we ask them to defy those instructions and face an 8-year ban from Cuba, is this something that the MAJ is aware of, this directive for them? And what's your position on the Jamaican government's responsibility to these doctors, nurses, and professionals from Cuba if they choose to stay?
Well, it's actually a little bit more nuanced than that. So yes, we are aware that they have a different health system and different governance structure from what we have in Jamaica. Personally, I don't think it's necessarily fair to actually go and put them in what we call an invidious position. They came based on a particular contract, and if that contract is not honored for whatever reason, then the exit clause from that contract should be what comes into play.
I think that Professor Reid, I'm sure that there is much more to discuss on this, but we're all completely out of time now for this conversation as we look at the fallout from now the Cuban medical mission leaving Jamaica and the consequences across the region. Thanks so much for joining us, MAJ President, Professor Marvin Reid. All right, we're going to take a break, inside lead story, and come back. I know there's more you wanted to hear, but we'll have more of these conversations. Up next, is the war in Iran over? We'll find out.
Jamaica's unemployment rate has fallen to 3.3%, down from 13.2% in 2016. Our government's continued focus on job creation is delivering real results. We are building Jamaica. The time by the Office of the Prime Minister is...
Hi, I am Kendi Panga.
What a guan?
What a guan?
That's a guan. What a guan? What a guan?
What a guan? Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays at 8 a.m., 1:30 p.m., and 10 p.m. on CVM TV.
And that's a guan for what a guan?
Every dream conquered is another dream gained. I land and I fly again like a jet plane. Headed straight in your direction, 'cause I'm wiser, one step closer. I'm winning 'cause I work so hard. And the music keeps on playing, and the people never say we are mash up the dance. Oh, what a feeling, don't stop dreaming. Keep on believing in the power of the feeling. Whatever you want, take a chance. Song in your heart, step in your dance. You got a spark, don't fit it dark, shine your lights out.
On February 28th of this year, the United States and Israel launched coordinated attacks on Iran. The opening salvo killed Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, the man who had governed the Islamic Republic since 1989. President Donald Trump has since declared the war over. 20% of the world's oil, though, passes through the Strait of Hormuz, primarily controlled by Iran. War risk premiums for vessels have jumped fivefold as ships can't pass through easily. 11,000 flights have been cancelled. 1 million travelers disrupted. On March the 8th, 2 days ago, Iran's Assembly of Experts named Mojtaba Khamenei, son of the slain supreme leader. Same family, name a different individual as Iran's new supreme leader. President Trump responded by saying that whoever becomes Iran's new leader is, quote, not going to last long without approval from the United States. Israel has threatened to kill him. Russia has pledged unwavering support for the new supreme leader. China has stated it opposes any targeting of Mojtaba Khamenei, and Tehran itself has said plainly that the United States does not determine when this war ends. We're expecting now to be joined by security analyst Dr. Jason Mackay in this segment as we talk about not only the impact of what's going on all the way across the world in Iran, but also how global powers are lining up around this conflict. Perhaps not overtly picking a side, but certainly indicating where their preferences lie. We're now 11 days into this conflict, and I've got to tell you, it's unclear as to where we are. New York Times reporting today has a timeline of all the things that had been said by Secretary of War, the new name for Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth in the United States, and President Donald Trump. And for the last 11 days, they've each had an answer every single day that perhaps contradicted the answer that they gave the day before. At the start of this war, President Donald Trump said it would be a couple days, asking the people of Iran to rise up against their leaders and indicating that the death of the Ayatollah was an impetus for the people of Iran to get involved. Well, they didn't do that. And so this has now led to a war that does not have backing on the ground. President Donald Trump then said, forget about the saving the people in Iran bit. We're looking to get rid of the regime and to get control of assets. And since then, we have been seeing a dramatic turnaround in just 11 days as to how long this war will take. Initially, 4 to 5 days, now 4 to 5 weeks. President Donald Trump and Pete Hegseth saying it could be a longer time. Hegseth saying he couldn't even tell, and it's not for him to decide how long the war would last. And President Donald Trump, most recently, saying, well, the war is over. That statement, though, has led Asian markets to respond, with them now jumping by 20 percentage points in response to that announcement. But Iran has said no such luck. That now with the death of the former Ayatollah and 40 days of mourning that has now been indicated by them, it is going to be a difficult process to now undo what has been done. On February 28, the world saw the beginnings of an attack that 7 presidents before President Donald Trump did not attempt, even after the Iranian Revolution and what we saw as great power movements in the 1970s that led to oil problems across the world. Similar to today, not quite though, as there's a greater dependency and a greater interconnectedness across the world. But we're looking now at a situation where President Donald Trump has said the war is over, but it doesn't quite work that way. Now, let's take you through some of the things that have been happening in this conflict. We'll be speaking about them later on in the show, but for 11 days, we have seen countries around Iran be involved as well. Iran deciding that as a result of the strikes started by the United States and Israel on February 28, they're going to strike nearby neighbors. And those strikes on nearby neighbors were to punish those neighbors for their cooperation with the United States. The United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Oman, who had been at the negotiating table with the United States and the United States and Iran all got involved in that conversation. Unfortunately, a situation that has now led those countries to deal with fallout from this war. They've also been told, though, by the Iranian Council of Experts that they're no longer going to be involved in it, saying perhaps it was a bad decision to go after your neighbors and friends in a dispute between yourself and the United States. However, the Iranian foreign minister has made it very clear Iran has no weapons that can make its way all the way across to the United States. But they can make it a very expensive war for the United States in the region. So we're going to be having more and more of these conversations as we figure out what it is that this means for Jamaica, what this means for the region. Iran has made it very, very clear that they're willing to continue this, having now, over the past few years, not only put in place capacity to have less expensive rockets that mean that they can outlast any planned movement by the United States nearby through the movement of mass vessels or getting people on the ground, a more difficult and complex situation indeed. But you're also seeing then them develop extreme cyber security capabilities that we have not yet seen put in place and deployed during this conflict. Capabilities that we are now really concerned about as we watch this conflict last a lot longer than many had anticipated, with global oil concerns that are projected to last a little bit longer than even what had been considered some of the darkest days in the Yom Kippur War in 1973 or in the Iran crisis in 1979. All right, we have with us finally on set this evening security analyst and consultant, Dr. Jason Mackay. Dr. Mackay, thanks so much for joining us inside Late Story.
Thanks for having me.
A pleasure having you in. Dr. Mackay has just joined us here, and we want to make sure that we can make the most of our time with him. President Donald Trump has said the war is over. Iran is saying the United States does not get to make that call. At this point in time, 11 days into a conflict, where are we now in figuring out if this war, with what seemed to be very little planning getting into it, has a clear exit strategy to get out?
Well, I don't know why anybody would think it's over. I mean, generally countries of this size don't fight on the battlefield because one is so much bigger than the other. What happens is that they now move into terrorist groups and terrorist cells, and you start getting attacked all over the world.
So you're saying then that it could be a fracturing of the conflict. We might have an initial and an official ending, but you could see a splintering now into various nations and a continuation of this for weeks, months, or even years to come?
Yeah, I mean, a major religious figure has been killed, so the persons are going to carry that to their grave.
Ayatollah Khamenei has been killed. His son, Mujtaba Khamenei, is the one that takes over. Will that matter as well? That the father in the 40 days of, or the son rather, in the 40 days of mourning for his father, as he takes over, might also have both personal and religious reasons to continue this war?
It's a matter where when you're fighting an unconventional war, it's a whole different battlefront because you're not fighting soldiers. Well, what happens is that it won't be soldiers on a battlefield attacking. What you'll find is it'll be people attacking banks and people attacking shopping centers. And, you know, we've seen it before after the occupation in Saudi Arabia when they put US troops there, and then there started to be random attacks all over the Middle East, eventually culminating in the one in 2001 in Manhattan. So that type of fight, because it's not even, what happens is that it happens, you stop bombing them, that type of thing stops. But the terrorism, it then goes into a hyper-terrorism.
Russia has pledged unwavering support for the new Iranian leader. China has opposed any targeting of him. We're watching a real life alignment of Moscow, Beijing behind Tehran. What are we looking at as Washington's strategic calculus now that these big heavy hitters have joined in? Does it change the end game? Does it change anything else? And do small countries like Jamaica have any hope of something like this ending peacefully if we now have these big players jump in?
Well, the good thing is that it's happening over there. You know what you don't want is a conflict like that happening in the Pan-American region. Because that now it directly impacts us. It's happening over there. So we are hit by oil prices. You know, if we have a major terrorist environment developing globally, then less people will travel, and less people traveling really affects our economy, stuff like that. But it's still pretty far from us, you know. That's the good thing about it.
The upside, yes, but it's also connected to President Donald Trump having a series of things he would like to accomplish. Him indicating that Venezuela was his first step, Iran is the second step, Cuba, right above us, is the third in his ability to get rid of these axes of power that former U.S. presidents have not been able to. It stays over there only for the Iranian part of the conflict, but he's made it very clear, Cuba, right above us, is next. Are we to be concerned then that we could be seeing military aggression in Cuba? We're in a regime that has lasted for 66 years, similar to the Islamic Revolution that we saw in Iran, is now not able to be squeezed economically, and there might need to be more done.
I hope not. But yeah, I have to remember that there is a large number of Cubans in the United States. I mean, by millions and millions, that are almost, they're more than just a diaspora. They want to go back home. They consider themselves almost refugees from their country, so they're not going to want to see it blown up. You know, so
but these are also a particular set of Cubans. So many of them, they're the ones who fled the revolution in Cuba. These are people who were former landowners. They are happy to see the collapse of the communist government. With that, then, similar to people like Marco Rubio, immigrants who are children of those immigrants, they might have a different calculus entirely as to what they're willing to tolerate.
No, I'm not saying that they don't want to see the regime fall. What I'm saying is that I don't think they would want to see it to take that turn, because I think it's going to be more economic.
Oh, so you don't think they might see bombing and the like in the way you're seeing in Iran?
No, I don't think so. And I know one thing you won't see in any of these conflicts is American boots on the ground. I think they've learned from Afghanistan and from South Vietnam that all of these things are a waste of time. You occupy it for a decade, cost you $1 trillion, you pull out, and the government takes right back over, you know. So I don't think any of these things are going to see actual boots on the ground, because it doesn't accomplish anything really. I mean, the last successful occupation the United States has had was Japan. You know, I mean, in 1945, when they really got to change something that actually lasted. Since then, it hasn't really gone very well every time you try it. You know, putting boots on the ground and trying to get persons to go your way. It just doesn't happen, because nationalism takes over and people just don't want someone else telling them what to do, even if what they're telling them is correct. So I don't think you're going to see that scenario, you know.
And I think that is really practical for many people at home to bear in mind. This idea of war that they might have had is based on World War II kind of tactics, or tactics around that time. And since then, we've had dramatic changes.
No, this is not World War II tactics.
Well, no, as in boots on the ground. That's what I mean. So boots on the ground, that sort of moving people into large numbers, into places. We might not be seeing that then in this Iranian conflict.
That I think is dead in every conflict.
And I think that is so important for you to have highlighted for us. Dr. Jason Mackay, security analyst, thanks for helping us understand the global context.
Thank you.
When we come back, he's been living in the United Arab Emirates for 12 years. Lennox Christie is a Jamaican science teacher inside an active war zone. He joins us next.
You want to see a country right now?
One thing about Jamaicans, we might have differences, but we know when something is good for all of us. And when we work together against crime and violence, we are stronger than ever. And that's how we know the Citizen Security Plan can work.
That one that name CSP.
The Citizen Security Plan is an initiative of the Ministry of National Security in partnership with the European Union. It's an all-of-government effort to create safer streets and build stronger communities. Go to mns.gov.jm to learn how you can play your part.
Let's delve deep into the issues. We'll take you beneath the surface.
Greetings and salutations. My name is Orville Higgins, and it's another edition of Fan Central.
Talking to the people at the heart of the top sporting stories. Hear from your favorite sportsmen and women and the administrators who work tirelessly to make it all happen. It's live sports talk.
I've written an entire article.
Yes.
Looking at all the major issues every Tuesday at 9 p.m. It's Fan Central.
When we talk about conflict in the Middle East, we often focus on governments and militaries, and we had that conversation just a moment ago. But there's another human dimension. Thousands of Caribbean nationals live and work in the Gulf region. They're teachers, engineers, hospitality workers, and health professionals. And many of them are now watching events unfold from inside the region. One of them is Lennox Christie, a Jamaican science teacher who has been living in the United Arab Emirates for 12 years. Lennox, you're live with us. Thank you so very much for joining us. Hours and hours into your bedtime.
May I tell you, good evening to your viewers and good evening to you.
I really appreciate you joining us. Lennox, you're joining us from the UAE, and we're having this conversation with you now as we see bombs flying across the region. First, let's check in with you. How you're doing, and now that you're seeing all of this take place so close to you. The United Arab Emirates was one of those places that received Iranian strikes, and there are now concerns about this conflict, even though Iran says it's going to start bombing its neighbors, expand into the region. How are you feeling?
Yeah, was one of those places. We are currently one of those places because there are still missiles. Wake up during the mornings and check in with the groups where Jamaicans are located all over the place, and there will be Jamaicans in Dubai and Abu Dhabi will report, and other parts of the region, other Gulf countries report that missiles are still being intercepted near them.
For many Jamaicans, they don't understand the idea of these missile interceptions. They just see bombs coming in, but they don't understand why many of them don't strike and why you don't see more destruction, especially in places like the UAE. Talk to us about what these interceptions look like as you look up in the sky and see them happening.
Let me clear up the misconception first. A lot of the videos that circulate on that people are seeing are where interceptions happen and debris fall, and they might still be flammable, and they might hit a building or they might hit somewhere and they might cause further problem. The missiles themselves have not touched down, especially where I am in the UAE. I'm in Abu Dhabi. What it looks like is way up, like at the altitude where airplanes would be flying, that type of altitude. People might see a stream like a comet, and then there is a massive explosion with an enormous high amplitude sound, boom, a huge boom, and that boom is so loud that it even some of the skyscrapers that you'll see in Dubai and Abu Dhabi, some of them there's massive vibrations that follow that. So people's houses will be shaking and so on. But so far, that is as bad as it's getting for a lot of people. There has been injuries in the double figures, and in the UAE there's been 6 fatalities. Giving thanks, that's not from our community, but we still mourn the losses of those lives.
You talked about a Jamaican community, a community of people that you're able to reach out to across the region. How are they faring, and how are you faring as you're having back and forth conversations with people who might be experiencing more or less than you are at this time?
As far as I'm concerned, I live in Abu Dhabi, but on the outskirts of the city. Maybe because I'm a country boy from Clarendon. I like living outside of cities. I don't like living in the heart of a city, and like not far from Dubai, not far from Abu Dhabi. But the people who live in the more populated areas, particularly areas near to US bases which are being targeted, they are experiencing regular disruptions, like when these missiles come in. We're talking about, for where I am in the UAE, that the statistics I've seen is over 1,000 so far. Missiles, that it was over 1,000 a few days ago. Missiles include missiles and drones. So people are showing varied emotions, from terrified, shaking up, families, especially with young children who don't understand the explanations that you're giving, why the house is vibrating, why that there is such a big boom, why why there's an alert on your phone that you need to take shelter, and if you're living in an apartment complex, they might ask you to you might go in the corridor or away from windows. Some children might not understand that. And adults as well some of them are quite shaken up. Others are kind of getting used to it and accepting the safety that the military within this region and their missile defenses capabilities are doing for us, because those missiles are predominantly not touching ground, and we have to give thanks for that.
So you're seeing then the benefits of these interception systems, the military on the ground there in the UAE, and you and others in the Gulf states are certainly watching what's going on. If you wanted to leave now, Lennox, could you?
Yes. Just this morning I dropped someone to the airport who's going to London. So there are flights going out. The airspace throughout last week and earlier the end of last week opened back partially, and every day they're opening a little bit more.
That's so important.
Flights leaving. Yeah, there are flights leaving, and some people are able to leave by land to the neighboring country, Oman, from which their airspace is a lot more open than the rest of the GCC, the Gulf states.
And Oman has made it very clear that they're willing to open their airspace to people trying to evacuate. So as long as they can make it across the border, they then have access to flights in that neighboring country.
Yes, and the governments agreed to have free bus shuttle to take them from the border to the cities where they can get a hotel or go straight to the airport.
Lennox, you're talking to Jamaicans right now on national television, so wave to the people in Clarendon from where you're from. These are people who are praying for you. They don't know you by name, but they know that you are there and they're concerned about you. What do you say to Jamaicans right now who are watching, who are seeing their reports, like your friends and family, and concerned? What do you say to those people?
I say your prayers are being felt. Keep praying, because we need it, especially if this situation escalates. I will say that we the Jamaicans have a network over here. And we organize ourselves, and we come even closer in times of triumph when we're celebrating sports like the Olympics, or in times of conflict where we're trying to bond together to find a common solution to this problem. We are relatively safe. We're relatively safe. I've not heard of anyone from the larger Caribbean community, or specifically the Jamaican community, being injured in any way. But we need all the prayers. Send the prayers, full up crocus bag of prayers, and send them up. We need them.
Lennox Christie, we wish you safety during this time. Continue to stay safe. Share with your networks of friends that we here in Jamaica want you to continue being safe. Thanks so much for joining us, Lennox Christie, all the way from Abu Dhabi there in the United Arab Emirates.
Thank you very much. I can go back to bed now.
You can go back to bed now. We keep Lennox out of bed 8 hours in the future. So 3:30 Lennox time now.
Yeah. Almost 4 a.m.
Almost 4 o'clock. Lennox, stay up to talk to us. Thank you so very much for staying with us,
right.
Lennox, and talking with us. That was Lennox there in Abu Dhabi, a Jamaican who is now in a war zone. We're taking a break and coming back to you. Global Current up next.
Hi, I'm Landy. Welcome to NLA Connect, the National Land Agency's customer engagement platform. NLA Connect is a simple, user-friendly platform designed to help you share your feedback, get support, and updates about land-related matters. Available 24/7, NLA Connect allows you to share suggestions, comments, and commendations. Submit queries and report issues. Attach files with your requests. Track requests and get real-time status updates. Connect with NLA client engagement officers and provide feedback on the service received by the platform. We're making it easier for you to connect with us. You can access NLA Connect via our website, using the kiosk at any of our offices or scanning the QR code displayed at our locations. Need any help along the way? Check out our FAQs section. It has all the answers you need in one location. NLA Connect, your voice, our priority.
Internationally acclaimed On Stage with Winford Williams.
At a new time, Saturdays at 8 p.m. on CVM TV.
So much more than entertainment.
Welcome back to Lead Stories Global Lead. I'm Jody Ann Quarry. We'll start off with our first story this evening, Inside Our Global Current, and it focuses on Cuba. Cuba is in darkness. The island is experiencing severe, sustained electricity shortages, blackouts that have become a symbol of a government under strain. Nearly 5 years, though, after unprecedented protests swept the island, analysts say another uprising is unlikely, not because the people are content, but because government repression has made the cost of dissent too high, and previous demonstrations produced no meaningful change. Let's hear more from Reuters.
Nearly 5 years ago, this sleepy Cuban farm town erupted in protest over chronic shortages of food and medicine and lengthy power outages. The demonstrations here in San Antonio de los Banos triggered a wave of protests across the country that shook the communist government. Police clashed with the protesters, leading to the arrest of more than 1,500 people at the time, and human rights monitors say about 800 remain behind bars. That crackdown has had a chilling effect on Cubans, even as the country faces the same mounting problems, with shortages made worse by a U.S.-imposed oil blockade and sanctions. Brian Jimenez says he was in San Antonio de los Banos during the 2021 protests.
At first, they weren't beating people up. The police were stopping people, but they weren't hitting them. Then some cars arrived with guys in berets, and they roughed up the people. I can assure you that people aren't going to protest in the streets because they're afraid.
Jimenez is one of several people Reuters interviewed that remember the brutality of the government crackdown, a testament to the enduring power of Cuba's security apparatus. Reuters could not verify his account of police beatings, though other demonstrators and human rights groups reported similar accounts of abuse. The Cuban government did not reply to a request for comment or respond to questions about how many July 11th prisoners it still holds. Residents Reuters interviewed expressed a range of opinions, from sympathy toward the Cuban government in the face of U.S. antagonism to openly criticizing the communist government for failing to produce prosperity.
The justification is the U.S. government's sanctions against Cuba, but from a certain point of view, I don't think that's the case.
That's San Antonio de los Banos resident Robert Perez. He says that despite the U.S. imposing a near-total oil blockade on Cuba, the Cuban government, quote, is responsible for finding solutions to provide services and products to its people.
So you've just seen then a country under pressure. This energy collapse in Cuba is not separate from the story of the medical missions we carried earlier. This is, though, the domestic context behind Havana's foreign policy retrenchment. A government that cannot keep the lights on at home is a government under maximum pressure, and maximum pressure produces maximum rigidity in its diplomacy. We move now to Iran and an Iranian schoolgirl strike that has left the world in shock. On February the 28th, the same day strikes on Iran began, a missile struck a girls' school adjacent to a naval base in Minab near Bandar Abbas on Iran's southern coast. More than 160 children were killed. Israel denied involvement. The United States said it would investigate whether U.S. forces were responsible. But new video evidence reviewed by international media suggests United States responsibility for the strike. Let's take a look.
One of the first strikes of the U.S.-Israeli attack on Iran hit a girls' school in Minab in southern Iran. The death toll is now at least 175, most of them primary school girls. On Tuesday, thousands of people filled the streets of Minab for a mass funeral. The girls' ages range from 7 to 12. Iran's school week runs from Saturday to Thursday. When the missile hit the school on Saturday morning, the girls were in their morning session. After the strike, parents search for their children among the dead.
This is her math book, Mohana Sari, first grade. This is her folder with her schoolwork, her homework here. What wrong has she done? Her color pencil box is still in her bag.
While Iran blamed Israel for the attack, neither Israel nor the United States has taken responsibility for the bombing. On Tuesday, the United Nations Human Rights Office urged the forces behind the attack on the girls' school to investigate.
In Iran, the Iran Red Crescent Society reports put the death toll at 787. In the single deadliest and devastating incident, dozens of girls were reportedly killed and injured when their primary school in Minab, in the south of the country, was struck during the school day. The High Commissioner calls for a prompt, impartial, and thorough investigation into the circumstances of the attack. The onus is on the forces that carried out the attack to investigate it. We call on them to make public the findings and to ensure accountability and redress.
We're watching a situation then where one school child dying in Jamaica has the nation stop. 175 girls died in that strike. This matters under international humanitarian law. Protocol 1 of the Geneva Conventions require that parties to a conflict take every single feasible precaution to avoid civilian casualties. Now, you'll hear the stories that the U.S. and Israel will say that the presence of a military installation next to the school is what caused the school to be bombed. But that does not, under the principle of proportionality, automatically justify a strike that kills 175 civilians. They were girls in a school, and the world is still waiting for an answer. Now we move you to Palestine and Gaza. Because as the world's attention has shifted to Iran, Palestinians in Gaza are describing a sense of abandonment. Ceasefire talks have stalled. The Trump administration's posture, which initially signaled willingness to push for a deal, has shifted. And for the people of Gaza, the lesson is one they've heard before. When great powers find a more urgent crisis, smaller ones get pushed to the margins. More in this report.
Amid the U.S.-Israeli war with Iran, Palestinians fear U.S. President Donald Trump's efforts to end fighting and rebuild here in Gaza could be left behind. Since October, a fragile ceasefire has held, and what Trump called his Board of Peace was working to implement the next phases of the truce. But 3 sources with knowledge of discussions told Reuters that such talks have been on hold since the U.S. and Israel attacked Iran. And that has left Jamal Sobeh in Gaza City despondent.
We had great confidence in Trump's Board of Peace. We were very surprised and very disappointed when we heard that the talks stopped in the Board of Peace. We want to rebuild our homes, fix them and return to our homes. Even in tents, just return to our homes, for the war to end in all areas, even in Gaza, for the war to end.
The pause threatens to stall implementation of Trump's flagship Middle East peace initiative, which he has cast as a major foreign policy objective. Trump's Gaza plan has hinged in part on whether Hamas militants would lay down their arms in exchange for amnesty. A White House official denied there had been any pause in the talks and said discussions on disarmament were, quote, ongoing and positive. Without commenting directly on the talks, an Israeli government official said the issue of Hamas disarmament was non-negotiable. One of the sources, who has direct knowledge of work by Trump's Board of Peace mission, described the pause as a brief, minor delay caused by flight disruptions, preventing mediators and representatives from traveling around the region. A Hamas official confirmed that talks on Trump's Gaza plan had been frozen for now, but declined to elaborate. The October truce halted major Israeli military operations in Gaza, but Israel has continued to strike what it said were Hamas targets, for what it claimed were violations of the ceasefire. The Gaza Health Ministry said at least 640 Palestinians have been killed by Israeli fire since October. Israel says 4 soldiers have been killed by militants in Gaza over the same period. In Jabalia, Talal Hamouda attributed a recent calm in Gaza to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu being distracted by operations in Iran and Lebanon.
The moment the war in Iran is over, he will come back to us with the same frequency, with the same violence. In the same way, the frequency of violence will not end. He is now busy with Iran, and it has nothing to do with Trump's plan.
It's a distressing video for you to watch, but for the Caribbean, we're watching from a distance, and the parallel is uncomfortable. Small states rarely get to choose when the world's attention arrives, after a catastrophic hurricane, for example, like Hurricane Melissa, or when it leaves. Now, from the withdrawal of doctors in the Caribbean to conflict in the Middle East, global power decisions have local consequences for small states like Jamaica. The challenge is constant, one after the other. We do not control global power struggles, but we must always navigate their consequences, whether in our hospitals or energy bills or the safety of our citizens abroad. Tonight, we have tried to map that navigation with honesty, with data, and with the understanding that the stories we cover on this program are not foreign news. They are Jamaican news with international addresses. That is the story. Lead Story Prime comes up at 8:30 tonight. It now puts a budget under the microscope. We dig into the numbers behind the national budget announced today and what they really mean for the country's economic future. Join us at 8 for the full investigation on Lead Story Prime. That's it for today's edition of the show. I'm Jody Ann Quarry, and on behalf of the entire CVM production team, thank you for watching Global Lead Inside Lead Story. Have a fantastic evening and stay safe. Up next, CVM News.